This is election 2018, the race for New Mexico State Auditor. I'm Fred Martino. In partnership with the League of Women Voters of Greater Las Cruces, we invited the candidates to join us for this forum. They will have 60 seconds to respond to each question and should not mention their opponent in the answer. The candidates include Democrat Brian Colón and Republican Wayne Johnson. Thank you both for being with us.
Great to be here, Fred.
Good to be here.
Thank you as well to Vicki Simons of the League of Women Voters of Greater Las Cruces, and she has our first question.
Good evening. Thank you for being here from the League. The first question is for Brian. Discuss your qualifications and experience for the state auditor position.
Vicki, I have really looked at this position very carefully and really realized that my background and my experience is a perfect match for the Office of State Auditor. I spent 10 years here in Las Cruces, and while I was here, went to New Mexico State University where I got a finance degree. Took that finance degree and went back up to Central New Mexico, or went to law school at the University of New Mexico School of Law, and have been practicing law for the last 17 years. We've done mergers, acquisitions, business transactions, financial transactions that are quite complex, and I have been involved in the political landscape for quite some time as well. And so I have a great understanding through my practice of law, the office's subpoena power, and holding people accountable for waste, fraud, and abuse. The background that I have is absolutely a perfect fit for this office with a finance and law degree.
Thank you. Wayne.
Thank you. Thank you for having this forum. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today and all of you out in the viewing audience. You know, my background is really twofold. First of all, it's in small business, where I was actually a media person and worked in news and understand that. And now in government, in almost 8 years at Bernalillo County as a county commissioner. And during that time period, my biggest focus was on transparency. It's the first thing I started to do at Bernalillo County. And right now we have at Bernalillo County one of the toughest and strongest transparency ordinances in the state. As your state auditor, that has been my focus as well. I call myself the state's chief transparency officer. And my job is to get in and shine the light on what your governments are doing and how they're performing, not just on their finances, but also in their performance. And that's why this job is perfect for me going forward. It's been good for the last 10 months, and we've gotten a lot done during that time.
Thank you.
Wayne, we'll begin with you on this question. Does the state auditor make policy? If yes, what?
Absolutely no. We make policy only with regard to the rulemaking authority under the office. That is how we govern and work with the IPAs that do most of the work here in the state of New Mexico. But that's one of the misnomers statewide, is the Office of the State Auditor and the auditor himself cannot make policy. We do not do appropriations. Those actions are rightfully set in the Constitution with the legislature and the executive branch and the governor. So if you want policy, that's great. You've got to go through the legislature. You've got to go through your local government. What we do is measure policy. We look at what they're doing and what they're supposed to be doing. And most importantly, what we do is we report back to the governing body and, of course, the public as well. So no, we do not make policy.
Okay. Brian, your view of this?
Well, I think this office is super important, and it doesn't necessarily make policy as its number one function, because its number one function is to fight waste, fraud, and abuse and corruption in New Mexico. But in fact, it does make some small appropriations to make sure that governmental entities have the capacity to put the controls in place and have the audits that are necessary for these small entities so that we can make sure that we're holding them accountable. I will tell you that under State Auditor Tim Keller, he created what he called the Government Accountability Office, because he realized that in fact the auditor's office is in the unique position to actually gather data from all 33 counties, take that data and present it in what he brilliantly called transparency reports. And those transparency reports are then provided to policy leaders, lawmakers, and government officials to help them better understand what the implications are of a given change in policy or continuation of a policy. So while we don't make policy directly, we're uniquely positioned to provide that data to our policymakers.
Brian, the next question is for you. Under what conditions would the state auditor launch a major investigation of a person or entity?
Well, I think anytime you see waste, fraud, and abuse, and in particular corruption, you know, that the taxpayers of New Mexico have lost faith in government, whether it's because of Diana Duran our former Secretary of State, who's now a convicted felon and was forced out of office, or other gaps in public service where public officials have made poor choices. Taxpayers have lost faith. And so for me, anytime you have a public official that is wasting taxpayer dollars or involved in corruption, there's no room or there's no latitude. Because look, corruption doesn't have a party affiliation. Democrat, Republican, all elected officials and governmental entities must be held accountable. And for me, I look forward to taking my legal background and my finance background, doing the initial investigation, and then working hand in hand with the Attorney General and law enforcement agencies to make sure that we do our best to hold people accountable and following through with prosecution.
Thank you. Wayne, would you like the question repeated?
Sure.
Under what condition would the state auditor launch a major investigation of a person or an entity?
Well, there's a lot of things that go on before that happens. We have a special investigations division, and in that division, we go through and receive lots of different information from our fraud hotline, 1-866-OSA-FRAUD. I know that's a shameless plug, but that's an important number for people to remember. When we get those tips, we do a fact-finding investigation, and at that point, if we decide that we need to step beyond that, we will then oftentimes send out investigators, as we did this week in Doña Ana County, to work on a charter school where thousands, in fact tens of thousands of dollars look like they've been stolen. These are the things that we do every day. Now, when you get to the major investigation, that's when we've gone through the process, had our investigators there, and they start pulling these threads, and they find more and more information, and it looks like this thing is ballooning. And that's how you get to the major investigation stage and a designated audit from the auditor's office.
Thank you.
Wayne, which areas require the immediate attention of this office?
Well, right now it's all of these entities. There are a lot of joint powers agreements across the state, and they haven't been audited heretofore. My predecessors missed them for whatever reason. In some cases, they notified them that they were subject to the Audit Act, yet these entities were not audited. One such agency is the RCLC, or Regional Coalition of Land Communities. Another one is the New Mexico Medical Insurance Pool that's done audits over the years, but not compliance audits. And last year, under Auditor Keller, they found 8 different compliance violations with 8 different contracts. So we know there are problems there with compliance, yet they've taken the unusual step of suing the state auditor's office to try and keep their compliance under wraps and to keep them from coming into compliance with the State Audit Act. That's something I won't stand for, and we're fighting in court right now.
Brian, which areas require the immediate attention of this office?
Look, there are about 1,300 governmental entities that require audits on an annual basis. And so there's really no first and last. We have to make sure that we have the resources necessary to audit all of these entities and look into what entities need special audits. You know, in fact, under this administration, we've seen a 15% decrease in the budget for the Office of the State Auditor. 4 years ago, the budget was $3.8 million. And then they ran for 4 years with a 10% vacancy rate because each year it had been decreased. Currently, that budget's at about $3.4 million. Now, I don't know what drives that, other than to say, look, if there's one budget that should be appropriated fully, it has to be the Office of the State Auditor, because it's impossible for that office to do its job well if it is not appropriately funded. And so we need to make sure that the funding stream is appropriate to make sure that we're getting to all of these audits on time. Now, there are some urgent issues in the state of New Mexico, whether it's the conservatorships that we're dealing with and collaborating with the courts, or other issues, but they're all important.
Okay, I'll try again.
Thank you.
The state auditor, Brian, this is for you. The state auditor contracts with independent accounting firms to audit state agencies. Should these firms be prohibited from making campaign contributions to the candidates for state auditor? Explain.
Sure. So I do think that there's a history of, again, New Mexicans losing faith in government. And these are exactly the questions that come up. And we all have to hold ourselves accountable. We have to hold ourselves accountable when we go before ethics boards, when we're issued fines. We've got to come clean and be compliant. I have no objection to making sure that IPAs, or independent public accountants, firms that do work with the state auditor's office, if they're prohibited from giving to state auditor campaigns, I'll absolutely comply, and I think it's a great idea.
Thank you. Wayne?
Well, a number of years back, this came from the fact that one of my predecessors in office decided to start handing out contracts based on contributions. And the legislature acted then to create a very good system, which is the firm profile process. Now, each one of the entities, that's 1,300 entities that every year we review, are actually done by IPAs, but those IPAs are certified, if you will, through the firm profile process. So it insulates the auditor from the actual independent public accountant. Now, we can roll them off in certain circumstances, but even that is narrowly defined. So from a standpoint of law, I think it's difficult to stop somebody from actually making a contribution, and there may be some constitutional issues with that. But going forward, I always make sure that what we do is don't solicit directly to those CPA firms. And frankly, they receive no better treatment one way or the other.
Wayne, how would you ensure transparency in how New Mexico governmental agencies spend their money?
Well, that is what we do at the Office of the State Auditor. I like to call myself, again, the Chief Transparency Officer in the state of New Mexico. I'd like to expand that function. One of the things we did at Bernalillo County is create a sunshine portal, the Bernco View. It's one of the best in the state. I'd like to see all the transparency for the state of New Mexico, all of those different transparency portals put under the independent auditor. The independence is key here, because when you're connected to everybody else, then when you're doing audits, that information may be tainted. But this office needs to be standalone, it needs to be independent, and we are absolutely in the best position to reveal those finances, to make sure that those audits are available. My media background makes it easy for me to go out and talk to the public. I am out there talking about what their governments are doing. I'm out there talking about seniors. When there are $8,000 parties being held by NMAAA, instead of feeding seniors, I'm telling those seniors, this is what your government is doing, and I'm making sure they know that there's something that needs to be done about it.
Ryan.
You know, look, transparency is key to rebuilding trust, and we've talked about it a little bit, but I will just tell you that I have spent the last 9 months traveling the state of New Mexico. I've been to all 33 counties 2 times, making sure that we are doing our outreach to take our message. And I think it's high time that the state auditor's office did the same. The way we restore that trust and transparency is not waiting for people to look into Santa Fe, but actually take that office to the people of New Mexico to say, look, we need your help. We need you to lean in. Here are the opportunities for you to engage with that office, whether it's through the fraud hotline, because we know the vast majority of fraud that's uncovered, according to certified financial examiners and the nation's report that they put out every year, the vast majority of fraud that's uncovered is through whistleblowers and fraud hotlines. So we need to educate the public, and that will increase our transparency in government, because people will be tuned in, engaged, and working with our office. And the best way you can do that is take the show on the road. 8 years ago, no one knew there was a state auditor, but now we get to move forward. They know there's a state auditor. Now we got to help them understand what the state auditor does.
Thank you. Brian, next question for you. Would you like to see any changes in the Audit Act? Explain.
That's a great question, and it gets back to the one policy that the auditor's office gets to implement. And in fact, they've made some progress in this regard, but not enough. And that progress is in the area of collaboration, making sure that all our stakeholders are at the table when we revise that rule. We've said that there's a comment period, but we don't really do much outreach on that comment period. And there are better ways and functions for the Audit Act to make sure that we're appropriately serving all stakeholders. That means the independent public accountants, it means the governmental entities, and it means those that are employed at the state auditor's office. Those 36 employees or 33 employees, depending on the vacancy rate, they need to be able to be at the table to have that input and hear directly from the end users, whether they be the governmental entities or the IPAs that are actually conducting the initial audits. So for me, it's about collaborating. That's how you increase the quality of the audit rule, is take that feedback and then move forward.
Thank you. Wayne.
Actually, we entered into an agreement just recently, and I was proud to do this, to start working with the courts on, basically, we go out and we audit conservatorships, and we're checking to make sure that your grandparents or your senior citizens' money, those people that are protected persons under law in the state of New Mexico, that their money isn't wasted. That's something that the Audit Act doesn't empower the Office of the State Auditor to do. And in some ways, we've impaired our independence under this umbrella that's judicial. So we have a separation of powers issue. If you ask whether or not there would be a change to the Audit Act that I would like to see, They need to, or the legislature, and this is something I will work to do, to expand the authority of the office very carefully so that we have the authority to step in the cases of these protected people and make sure that their finances aren't being stolen, they aren't being wasted, because these are folks that are under protection of the government itself, and we need to have our own authority to do that as opposed to leaving that with the courts.
Thank you.
Okay, Wayne, how would you handle the investigation of a family member, friend, or acquaintance?
I think that comes down to the entire core of the office itself. Independence is at its core. And what you can do, I have 35 different CPAs in my office, 32 if you're taking the 3 vacancies that we're required to maintain by the state legislature. There are ways to build firewalls within the agency to make sure that this happens and that the agency's reviews don't impact the actual IPA work. But remember, most of those audits are not done by the OSA itself. It's done by an independent public accounting firm that are made up of CPAs with professional standards on top of that. So that creates a firewall between the office and the actual work being done. I won't shy away from powerful people or even family members if they require auditing. I will recuse myself from any involvement in that review. That's absolutely critical because you're getting back to the fact that people have to trust the audit and the information that's presented by the auditor.
Brian.
And this is a huge distinction. I do think that firewalls in an office of 36 people are difficult, and I don't think they serve the public. If we're going to regain the trust of public, if I've got a friend or family member, I've only got 2 blood relatives in the entire state of New Mexico, so that's not much risk, but I have a lot of friends. But if I'm in the position where I have a close friend who is going to be subject to an audit or there's an investigation, then look, we need to take measures to get that out of the office to allow another governmental entity, whether it be a law enforcement agency, an attorney general, or the district attorney that can actually oversee and engage an independent public accountant for the purpose of doing that audit before I sign off on it. Because once that IPA brings back the form, I still have to sign off on it as the state auditor. So that independence that's there, it's gone when I accept it. If Bernalillo County has a firm do an audit and I was at Bernalillo County, once that audit is conducted and completed, I get the report back. I have to decide whether to accept it, whether to call for more investigation or not. There's no independence if I don't put that out of the house.
Brian, the next question is for you. Should the state auditor's services be more accessible to local governments? Explain.
Yeah, no question. This is one of my top priorities in terms of taking the auditor's office on the road. We have a ton of governmental buildings in all 33 counties in New Mexico, and I intend to get on the road. I intend to be in communities and publicize what our office does. Because look, the IPAs, they're doing some testing for each of these governmental agencies. But frankly, between you and me, what we know by data is that very little fraud and abuse is found by those independent public accountants. Where most fraud is identified is through whistleblowers, through people who report fraud through the fraud hotline. So if we take a situation where the IPAs are looking for a needle in the haystack, but if I come into Doña Ana County, if I go down to Hidalgo County or Grant County and I say, look, we need your help. We need you to tell us where the gaps in government are, where there's issues that make you uncomfortable. It takes it from the needle in the haystack to actually you saying, there's the bale of hay, forget the haystack. You've got an issue right there. And I want to take this office on the road to all 33 counties.
Thank you. Wayne?
You know, it's interesting. This is more than just a road show. And you asked about local government. This is where my background really is important. I've worked in local government. I understand the needs of local government. I understand their challenges. And when we look at all of these different audits across the state of New Mexico, yeah, there's a bunch of things. And any dollar that's absolutely stolen or is misappropriated is a dollar that's not going where it's supposed to go. But those agencies, by and large, are trying to do the best they can. And oftentimes, what they don't know is how to do it right. And so I know how to work with those governments. I know how to bring them back into line, which is really what our job is about as auditors. I mean, think about this for a moment. We're the only agency that is actually proactive in stopping waste, fraud, and abuse. We don't look just for the waste, fraud, and abuse itself, but for conditions that allow that to happen. So if you've got poor internal controls, you're probably going to end up with a darkness in your system and a place where waste, fraud, and abuse grow.
Okay. Wayne, does the state auditor's office work with the legislature? Should it? Explain.
It does. I had my first experience in front of the Budget Committee last year with the OSA's budget. We do work in that regard. But as far as creating their policy, we inform their policy. We don't create it. One of the things my predecessor did, and I think he went too far, was start making policy statements about various things around this state. What we should do is provide information without any kind of varnish to it, to shine it up one way or the other, but to make sure that those policymakers understand the strengths and the weaknesses of their current policy and what's really going on. We look for problems. We identify those problems. We report back to the governmental bodies, and we also make sure the public knows about it. That is the function of the State Auditor's Office.
Brian.
So clearly, I think that the Office of the State Auditor, its number one priority is to fight waste, fraud, and abuse. But anytime it can work with the legislature to inform policy, that's absolutely right. Now, let me give you the perfect example where the Auditor's Office is uniquely situated to advance important public policy. In Tim Keller's administration, he did an audit of rape kit backlogs. We had over 5,400 rape kits that were backlogged in all areas of the state of New Mexico. We had the highest per capita backlog of rape kits in the nation. And everybody was talking about it behind the scenes, but no one was actually doing anything. It wasn't until Tim Keller brought forth that transparency report and he reported out to the legislature and to the public exactly what was going on there in terms of risk and about what a disservice to New Mexico that backlog was, that actually policy changed and entities started investing resources to clear that backlog. So for me, creating transparency reports in areas of important public policy, that's going to be something we do a lot.
Thank you. Brian, for you, what new technology should the State Auditor's Office acquire, if any, and how would you use it?
Well, I think technology is where it's at. And for this office in particular, one of the things I want to do is actually try and get the legislature to appropriately fund and the governor to appropriately fund another piece of work in the Auditor's Office for cybersecurity, making sure that we do an audit for all our governmental entities about how secure they are. How well are we prepared for cyber attacks in New Mexico? We know our Secretary of State recently found out that there was potential exposure there, and we know that other governmental entities in New Mexico are also at that same risk. The Auditor's Office is a perfect place for us to start doing that review, that investigation, and bringing in teams to help us understand where our weak points are or where we need more control measures, so that we can report that back out to the legislature in an unbiased way, but in a factual way, so that they can appropriately fund security measures to each of these governmental entities that are at risk. So for me, I think the technology is clearly on the cybersecurity side. New Mexico has not invested money, and if we don't do it soon, we're all going to be sorry.
Thank you. Wayne?
Well, I think that the office could benefit from better database integration. Part of my background is also doing IT work, so I understand it very, very intimately. Technology is always a good way to work. One of the things I'm working on right now is to go into a true multi-year engagement process, and that requires new technology. Right now we say you're going to have a 3-year engagement, Bernalillo County or Doña Ana County, but we only let you do 1 year at a time. We make you go back out to procurement every year. That's inefficient. That's not the way it should work. And to do this, we need to make some technology changes within the office, and we need to move forward with the legislature to get the type of technology and database integration so that we can track cases better and that more of our office information is easily accessible by the public. That means that transparency portal side. That means additional technology to make sure that it's searchable and it's easy for people to actually access.
Thank you.
And this question, Wayne relates. Should New Mexico's checkbook be online in an easy to understand, searchable way? Why or why not?
Well, I absolutely believe it should be. It's something we did at Bernalillo County. I believe that more information is better. It's funny, when I first came to the office, my special investigations director was asking them about how they started out and how they were working cases. And they'd go to different county websites and look to see what's going on there. And he said, this county's okay. And I said, well, how about Bernalillo County? He said, oh, they almost give us too much information. And as somebody that's a transparency advocate, somebody that believes that the major function of this office is to provide information to the public, that was the best thing I could have heard since I wrote that transparency ordinance in Bernalillo County. I know that this office has a bigger role to play, but it's not to shape policy. It's not for road shows. It's absolutely to put information in front of the public in the most efficient and searchable manner.
Brian.
I couldn't agree more that all those transactions should be available to the public in a way that's easily and searchable. Right now we have bulky systems out there that don't really work. What we have right now is an online reporting system for fraud that doesn't work very well right now. You don't get updates, you don't get tracking data. It's very, very difficult to interface not just with the Office of the State Auditor, but it's also difficult to understand what your local governments are doing with our taxpayer dollars. And again, for me, a priority is to restore taxpayers' trust in their government. It's been breached, and frankly, taxpayers are tired of it. And one of the reasons I'm running is to restore that trust. So if we continue to want to do that and advance that agenda, then we have to make that information available to the public. We've started down that road, but we've got a long way to go. And I'm very interested in being an advocate for, again, increasing the sunshine on all the transactions for the state of New Mexico, but not just in a way that puts out the data, but in a way that makes it usable for end users.
Brian Colón and Wayne Johnson, candidates for state auditor in New Mexico, thank you both for being with us.
Thank you, Fred.
Vicki Simons, thank you for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you. We'd like to thank KRWG for this great collaboration. It's been wonderful for the public.
And KRWG is very appreciative of the League of Women Voters of Greater Las Cruces, and we appreciate you at home for making public media happen through your donations. Have a great week.